Hello everyone, how you guys doing? Hopefully you guys are having a wonderful day, and today we are here with a video on PSA pop report changes over the last couple years. Typically I do a video on this every 3 months where I just go through the last 3 months and how that's changed. I'll still do that here next month, but it has been delayed because I was able to get help from someone basically automating it. Nonetheless, with all that aside, I want to go through how populations have changed from 2022 to 2023 on a lot of the major cards, and I think you guys will have fun with it as well. That's what we'll get into. First off, we'll be talking about just PSA graded items. I really trust them for soccer more than anything else, and they also have a really easy site to navigate, so that also helps. In addition to that, I use the data given from the GemRate site, a nice little site where basically you can go up to player data, search by player, find out a really nice graph that basically displays how the population has changed for those players over time, and with the help of these two sites collectively, I was able to make this video. So check those out if you like. I will leave the links down below, but let's go ahead and get into it. So here we go. I'm going to go through mostly, 50s to 2000s players. I think that's the prime area to be in if you want to talk about population reports. I think after the 2000s, as you get into the 2010s and 2020s, it's more about parallels that are already numbered. Before that, though, you have to do sort of your own work, and PSA does that as well in finding, how much of this stuff is out there, right? Also, authenticating it and grading it being important, but authenticity is huge. And we start with Bobby Charlton. I'm going to do this in a manner in which we sort of stay in different regions. This is going to be the UK. So here we have Bobby Charlton. As you can see, a graph that goes, mighty high and to the right. So when we look here, basically on the left-hand side, you can see the years and what the pop is then. So this starts in 2021, ends in 2023, where we are today. So at 2022, about, right here or so, we're at 112, okay? So 112 in total. By the end of 2023, we're up closer to 155, so up over there. And as you get to the current day, you go up to 189. So as you can see there, really not much changing, a pretty up and to the right pace. One thing that you can't see here that I wish GemRate could do, but it's going to be very difficult, of course. I wish I could know the average grade over time. As we'll see with other things that do the GemRate typically goes down pretty significantly, and I'd imagine the higher grades here are not coming in as plentiful. I know for myself, whenever I see these on auction, they're typically lower grade, but as you can tell, there's still a good amount coming to market, right? 43 last year compared to 34 this year. A little bit of a slower rate, but ultimately nothing too crazy from the Bobby Charlton. Looking at the George Best here, we have 2022 had 52, and 2023 had 69, and currently has 91. So again, no real slowing down. I again will say that I can guarantee you the GemRate or the average grade is going down significantly. Back in the day, typically 5s through 8s and stuff like that was getting graded. Now, even 1s, choose authentic, whatever you got, it's worth sending just to know it's authentic. Given that, though, it is at 91 and started at 48, so, pretty significant up and to the right. One thing of note here that you might see in other ones is that there isn't a real instance where there's like a lot being submitted at once. I mean, maybe right here you could say, but ultimately that's nothing too much. Moving on over to France with Zinedine Zidane. This is the first one where you notice a pretty decent drop off in terms of grades per year. 2022 we had 73 right here, and we go to 103 by the start of 2023, and then in 2023 we go much slower rate, but still up and to the right, of course. Pops rarely ever go down. We will see instances where that does happen, and I'll explain that. But yeah, for stickers especially, you want to stick with PSA pops because they do a great job of authenticating, and as, again, we'll talk about, they also take them out of the pop report if found to be fake, and they pay out, all that fun stuff. So yeah, here a decent slowing, I would say. If we look, 100 or so around towards the end of 2022, and then over 14 months, you're basically having one a month graded, to which I don't know what people generally assume is a healthy rate of grading. But one a month doesn't sound anything crazy. We then have Thierry Henry, the first one where you can see very early on what his pop was in 2021. So this is a good one to explain basically what people were seeing at the time and how scared everyone was, right? So whenever prices were really high, this is peak pricing down here. Whenever prices were really high, pops then skyrocketed, right? This goes from a pop 15 to a pop 72 in, what is that, like, I don't know, 8 months, 9 months? That's huge. That's a 6x in pop, so everyone sort of freaks out. And that happens, again, in 8-9 months. Then you continue to go on from there. We pick up in 2022 in March, and then you do 21 months since then, and there's only been less than 30 graded. So that's a huge difference. I mean, the trajectory is entirely different, and the percentages don't look as drastic, right? If you buy this as a Pop 91 and, maybe 8 months it's a Pop 100, you don't feel terrible. If you bought this as a Pop 15 and suddenly it's a Pop 75, well, you feel different, right? But that all goes to how much do you value the pop reports. And, I think you can start to value these more and more. And that's sort of what we'll see as we go through this. I didn't know if we would see that, but I just sort of pick cards at random. I think that's where we get. Staying in France, we have Kylian Mbappe here. This one's going to be a pretty heavy drop off in terms of what it was doing. I mean, as you can see back here, from 2021 in the April month to the, September, we went from 600 to 1,050. And in the, following months here, we have less pop increase than we did in those, say, 5 months. I mean, it's just entirely different sort of what we have now. But of course, if you're buying up here, I mean, you already know this is a pretty plentiful card, not in PSA 10 exactly, but even then it's still somewhat plentiful. Nonetheless, you can tell really for sure here with the Mbappe that there's not hordes of them coming in. Of course, there's still a good amount, but moving on to Lionel Messi, we'll hit up Spain for a little bit. I don't want to dig too far into Spanish vintage because there isn't a ton of, really notable stuff. There's great players and stuff like that, don't get me wrong, but I don't think many iconic cards, if we're being honest. With Messi, though, we have more than enough, so just going here, starting in 2022 here on the side, we have 449, it goes up to 600, which is plus 151, and then currently it is plus 100. So this year, there were 51 grades less than last year, and presumably, each year, they're worse and worse grade you were to assume. Now, of course, that's not going to be perfect, but this is definitely still, pretty far up into the right. I mean, if we graph this early on, it was heading up here. So, I mean, if we stay at that current trajectory or so, we'd probably be at 1,000. Instead, we're at 700. And, if that continues to smooth out even more so. And so, yeah, I mean, this isn't a crazy rare card. Now, to be fair, 700 in soccer is a pretty big pop, but if you do this with soccer in general, if you zoom out, 700 is not crazy, especially for what is, in my opinion, the most iconic card in soccer. I think this is the most recognizable from people that aren't in soccer. But yeah, sort of what you'd expect from that graph. If we go to the 2004 Este sticker, that's a totally different subject, one that basically PSA had to deal with some fakes, and in doing so, they removed some from the pop, and so we haven't seen anything graded here basically almost over the last 2 years, which is just crazy to me. What's crazier to me is that they don't grade this, so they're kind of admitting they can't grade it accurately right now, but they are grading other ones. It makes me nervous that, we might have to have this sort of situation with other stickers at some point, but at the same time, it actually does, stop the pop report from growing, which is kind of a good thing. At the same time, it brings in authenticity questions, which is never good, but nonetheless, this is definitely worth mentioning. I assume we would have seen something similar here because the stickers, at least for what we'll see with Ronaldo later, they seem to have more of a drop off than the cards. And then going with another card here, kind of what we saw with the Mbappes earlier, right off the rip here in 2021, there was a ton getting graded. I mean, we go from 293 all the way up to 438. So that's like a plus 150 in a very short amount of time. And then when you zoom out from there, I mean, from that point on, we've only had 110, and that's over probably, actually over a couple of years. So that's pretty crazy to see. Now, of course, there are Campione and Campio versions of this card, so there's different pops, but basically over the year of 2022, there were 53 added to the pop, and over the year of 2023, there was 46 added to the pop. So relatively similar, a little bit of a drop off. Also, notably the gem rate continues to go down. This is one where you can tell 15.7 at the beginning goes down to 10% and, won't really ever get any higher. So then we move over to CR7. So we go with a couple of his rookies, moving to Portugal. This is one where at the beginning of 2022, he had 201 graded. At the beginning of 2023, he has 281 graded. And at what is going to be the beginning of 2024, he has 319 graded. So ultimately, 42 less graded this year compared to last year. So, definitely slowing down more than 50%. Also, again, notice the gem rate, 24% down to 11.9. So that's, not going well for that, and conditions only getting worse. And that's something that doesn't get talked about. It's not as sexy, right? But I think this is a really important thing to see because it means that, the cards were out there. People just didn't feel they were worth getting graded, or it didn't bother at the time. And then over time, it starts to come more and more to market. But yeah, I mean, early on, again, if we take these graphs that we were seeing early and extrapolate, I mean, in 2021, this is what people were seeing and probably thinking, something along these lines right here, that we're going to be at like a pop 500 at some point in time, that it's just going higher and higher. And we might be at pop 500 at some point. I mean, I'd surely imagine at some point we are, but it's not right now, and it'll probably be a long ways in the future with lowers graded. And, it sort of plays itself out, right? But I mean, this over here is much different than this. Okay, so generally a good sign on that one. If we go over to the football, this one, some of the graphs are tracked later, but I feel like this is a good example because even then, you can see that basically in 2022, just from this graph alone, which is missing 4 to 5 months of 2022, there were 30 graded, and then if we go from the beginning of 2023, there have only been 15 graded, so it has slowed down pretty substantially. I mean, more than 50%, and that's not even including 5 months of 2022, so you would assume like down 60-70% in terms of total graded. Going over to Italy now, we have a Diego Maradana 79 Calciatore. This is one of the most graded vintage cards, but also one of the most famous vintage cards, so it goes hand in hand sometimes. This starts at the beginning of 2022, which is pretty convenient. There were 73 graded in 2022, and then there were 43 graded in 2023. So again, pretty easy to tell here, but if we go off of the rate that we were supposed to be on given the prior year, this is sort of where we'd be, and we're a good chunk lower than that. Of course, 371 for a vintage soccer card, again, pretty high, but at the same time, really, really cool card, and seems to be a good bit below at least where we were sort of graphing it out to be. This is something you expect to happen. I mean, typically over time, it sort of evens itself out more and more and more, but there's always going to be sort of different things that play itself out, What we saw before was, I mean, back here, there's probably a huge boom, and a lot of that comes from just the pricing increase, and now that the prices have decreased, there's not going to be as much demand to go and grade this stuff, right? Roberto Baggio, here's a, one that was just huge up and to the right. If we go over here, again, one that was on a pretty crazy trajectory, but seems to have sort of leveled off in 2023. At least a decent bit. I mean, you can't fully say level off. Obviously, it's still going up and to the right as it should, but it is going substantially less. In 2022, there were 56 graded. This year, there were 26. Going over to the Forza Gold, more of the same. This one's pretty rare, but I felt it'd still be fun to look up. 2022, there were 9 graded. 2023, there were 2 graded. So as you can tell, again, even in this scenario, one where there's not as many grades coming out, this is, again, another scenario where there was a huge sale somewhere down in here. And so with that, someone then just, basically sent people to go get their things graded and sell them. And so we saw a huge increase, and now it's definitely leveled off much more so. Then we go over to Brazil with the Pelé Titulares. So this one is actually up. So from 2022 to 2023, there was a plus 13. And from 2023 to what's going to be 2024, there's been 18 graded. So as we can see here, that means that it is going up a decent bit more than it was before, but ultimately, still staying near the same pace, I would say. That's been something that's been rumored for a while, is that Brazil is one that, still has a lot of stuff that hasn't came out yet. And I mean, that's going to happen. Of course, this is all sort of something that plays out over time, but this seems to sort of go along with that. Going over to Sweden, where we have the Swedish record. This is a cutout that was meant to be cut out of Pele and Garrincha. And if we look in 2022 to 2023, there were 38 graded. And then in 2023 to 2024, there was 20 graded. So yeah, if we're going off the pace of 2022, this is probably the line you should have seen, and as you can tell, a good bit beneath it ultimately. I kind of hopped around because it's Pele, but we probably should have done the record after the Quiggle. Nonetheless, we go back to Brazil for the Quiggle, and this is one that is also up. So basically in 2022 to 2023, there was a plus 15. In 2023 to 2024, there was a plus 20. So as you can tell here, there was a pretty good run, and that is what did it for this year, right? So again, another scenario where it's still pretty up and to the right, pretty consistent, which is actually really surprising, I thought, because the Tupinamba is one that is probably worth less now than it was pre-boom because of sort of the narrative. It says 58, 59 on the PSA slab. It's believed to be 60, maybe 59, 60. I mean, nonetheless, I thought this would have gone down because basically it's worth less. There was already so many graded, there's probably not going to be tons more flowing in, but there still are. Now, again, surely in lower grades, but, still surprising, I thought. And we'll leave the Pele and go to Grinch. Now, this was a nice counterpoint to the Pele thing that we were talking about prior. There was tons of Pele's coming in. There still have been. This Grinch, though, there was 30 that were graded from the beginning of 2022 to the beginning of 2023. There's only been 7 this year, which is pretty insane in terms of a drop-off. I mean, again, I'll keep doing this, but if we continue at sort of the rate you're seeing here, I mean, this is believed to be, extremely high, and it really does drop off. And I've definitely noticed that. This is one that I've definitely wanted to get my hands on. And given the huge sort of run I thought there was going to be more, they still get sold and, I'll still have chances, but it's definitely not as abundant as I once thought, and that's sort of playing itself out. Now, maybe we go on another run at some point, but I have my doubts. Personally, I think that a lot of this is just sort of drummed up because of the price increases, sort of bringing them to market. And this type of stuff is probably more and more of what we'll see, which is just sort of slowly collectors just either bringing it or, having it graded themselves for whatever reason. But yeah, a huge run there, followed by a pretty decent lull. We'll look at Neymar as well, which sort of follows the same trend, which I found pretty surprising. Now this one actually, follows the trend a little bit longer, I would say. This is pretty heavy up and to the right until about the beginning of 2023, and then this year there's only been 6 graded. So, pretty strong then, and has fallen off pretty substantially. Now these are still, I would say, lower in price than they ever were on the run-up, but that's sort of Neymar's career arc and where he sits in the hobby, I guess, at this point. At least for this moment in time. But I thought this was pretty interesting. Definitely goes to show that Brazil isn't a one-trick pony. There's not just because there's lots of Pele doesn't mean there's going to be lots of Neymar, lots of Grinch coming out. Pele just definitely has a lot of stuff, and it's still being played out. And then we'll finish up with Maradana. So we'll go over to Argentina, and we have the 77 football. So I sort of had to Frankenstein 2 charts together since PSA graded it differently. I think they changed the flip. But basically, you can tell it's pretty up and to the right, generally speaking. I mean, if we start here and, if we continue on some trend lines, I guess early on, we were looking at this, if we pick a later point, you're kind of looking at this. And if we pick up here, you can tell that, everything's basically below the line. Part of that being because recently there have been some deleted from the pop. As you can tell, it went from 85 up here to what is 81 now. So that's because some of these basically have been pointed out to be fake. You can sort of just tell based on how they're cut and some different aspects of the card that they are not authentic. So some of those went by the wayside. If we look at the grading per year, we can see that in 2022 to 2023, there were 18 graded, and then from 2023 to 2024, there were 9 graded. Now, part of this is a little tricky because some fakes were graded and then taken out. So part of that 18 might be some fakes, and part of the +9 might have been, really like +12 if some fakes weren't taken out that had been graded prior. Nonetheless, I still think this shows a little bit of a retrace in terms of pop that's getting sent in. Again, you were to assume less and less condition than before. I'm guessing not as many unstuck, but, that's just my guess. And then we'll look at a couple 78s for Meridana. I think the 78 crack is a lovely one. This one is one that was graded pretty heavily pre-boom even then because, people just love it so much. I mean, it looks great. It's a nice 78 Meridana. Supposed to be a World Cup set. He didn't go to the World Cup, but that's sort of a fun characteristic of it. Nonetheless, when we start, it is 2022. Keep in mind, if you look at the bottom here, this is June of 2022. So this is only half a year right here. And we're going to go from 108 to 151. So that right there is a +43 over what is 5.5 months. After that, we then have a +22 over 12 months. So as you can see, pretty steep drop off, I would say, which is interesting because I still see Al just sending in tons of good stuff. I think it's for one of his Argentine friends. So, it's always fun to see it, but to think that I'm seeing a good percent of, what's still coming in is pretty crazy when there's not that much coming in. I mean, 151 to 173 up here. I mean, that's nothing all too crazy. Now, again, back here when prices were going up, people probably were seeing a chart more along the lines of this. And, probably terrified, like, this is just going to go up forever. But, you know, again, things do kind of play their course. Still a pretty populous Maradona. I mean, 173 definitely isn't low for vintage, but, you know, I definitely think that it's a great sticker. And then we go over to the 78 Estampas for Maradona. So, want to throw this one in too as a third for him, and basically, this is one where, again, you know, one of those charts where you have it cut off pretty early, so there's only 4.5 months in this chart from 2022, but in that 4.5 months, you can see, you know, goes up pretty substantially. Plus 13 right here. If you continue this line out, you know, does it look great? A good bit higher, and at this point we're a good bit lower. As you can tell, in the last year we had 16 graded compared to the 4.5 months prior to the last year where there were 13. So if you make that a yearly rate, there was about 30 the year prior, there's 16 this year, and thus, you know, seems like a decent bit of a dip. But yeah, that's going to be it for me today. Hopefully you guys did enjoy. If you did, make sure to leave a like. You know, I do this type of a video to just kind of help people that are into non-numbered cards. I feel like there's been so much of a focus on numbered cards recently, and, you know, I think it's a bit of a shame. I think it really sort of paints the wrong light on how people should collect. I think people now have sort of a fear-based collecting mentality, which after what we've seen over the last few years, yeah, I can't blame them. But I do enjoy these types of cards, and I think that generally what we're seeing with the PSA Pops is that they're becoming a bit more trustworthy, and at least you can go out there and have a better understanding of what you were buying. When back in the day, I don't think that was as much the case, and, you know, back then people were so much more eager, and now people are so much more scared of buying this type of stuff, and, you know, I find that interesting. So hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, make sure to leave a like. I'd appreciate it greatly. Anything you want to tell me, would love to see in a comment down below. If you want to see more videos like this as soon as I go live, make sure to subscribe. But with that said, hopefully you have a wonderful day, and peace.